Welcome. I'm Debbie Rosas, and you are listening to Get In. I'm the founder of the NEA Technique, an international body and life somatic movement art. Yep, movement. Movement so it becomes a way of life. It's been actually changing people's lives since 1983. Yes, it changed mine first. It changed me so much that I wanted to share the power of movement. More important than the power of movement is sensing movement and sensing the relationship you have with your body. Today on Get In, we're exploring something that I think many of us might be sensing and feeling right now. At least I know I am. From time to time, overwhelm, reactivity, pressure, a disconnection sometimes, and a desire to want to disconnect. And often I don't even know why, but I feel it. Sometimes I think it's stress. Sometimes I think it's just my personal life from watching the news and just not knowing how to deal with what's happening in life. But what if it's actually something deeper than that? What if much of what we're thinking or we're sensing, we're feeling, and we're doing is being driven by life events that have created certain behaviors and certain body patterns? And we didn't consciously choose them, but they're there. Today, I'm joined by Aaron Teich. Now, he's an integrative, don't you love the word, integrative counselor, integrating all aspects of who we are. He bridges modern therapeutic approaches, and there are lots of new things when we use the word modern. Approaches, though, that he uses himself are internal family systems, EMDR, polyvagal theory, with ancient mind body traditions. And this is what really interests me. There's so much wisdom from the ancient traditions. He holds degrees from Harvard traditional Chinese medicine, and he brings over 25 years of experience in Kundalini yoga and healing practices. He walks the talk, he lives it. But what makes his work, I think, so powerful is his focus on the inner landscape. How not just our conscious, but our subconscious patterns, especially those things that we form early in life, they continue to affect us and shape our thoughts, behaviors, and our relationships. Now, the thing that I love about his work is something that I'm passionate about: resonance. The power to transmit a message without seeing somebody. He has a deeply personal phone based practice. It's about sensing, it's about receiving, and not necessarily being in the presence, but receiving the power of healing energy like touch. He helps people navigate inner conflict. Who doesn't have inner conflict these days? And reconnect with themselves, that authentic part of ourselves that we know is deep inside. And he helps people move towards, I love it, meaningful, right? What's meaningful, important to us, that's how we create lasting change. So I chose the topic today: why we feel stuck, trauma, patterns, and the intelligence of the body. It's a conversation I hope we're going to get into that you're going to get excited about how we can listen to our body and interpret its sensory messages. It's one of my passions. I call it the body's way. We're going to explore how trauma and early experiences, I've had my own, I bet you've had yours too, shape our nervous system and therefore affect our relationships and our even our sense of self, how we talk, our posture, how we deal with that inner conflict, and why one part of us wants to move forward. We can see it. We may go to therapy. We do all kinds of work to move forward. And yet, there is another part of us that is continuing to hold us back. So, how does the body, breath, sensation, movement, how can it all move us forward? But before we begin, I want to open up with, if you know me, you know I love the art of sensation. I'd like to open up with a sensory experience opening. All right, so get comfortable. If you need to close the door, pull the blinds, pull the blinds. Create a safe space for yourself, a place where you won't be disturbed. And then sit comfortably. If you want to lie down, you're welcome to. And just arrive here now. And I'd like you to first, with your eyes open, look around this space that you're in. Let your eyes take in the room, the shapes, the light, the colors. This is the environment you're nested in. Now orient yourself and just notice where you are. And allow your gaze to just soften, or better yet, go ahead and close your eyes for a moment. Let's drop into that place where you can't see, but you can see through sensation. And then take a slow breath in. Smell the moment. Sip the air through your nose. And now exhale gently through your mouth. And you might even want to make an ah sound. Ah, let that resonance just move the cells, the 50 trillion cells in your body. Now again, inhale and exhale slowly. And just arrive a little more fully. And now I'm going to ask you to bring your awareness to your jaw without changing anything. Just simply notice. Is there holding, tightness, effort? Just observe. Are your teeth touching? Is there gripping or is there a little space? Just notice. Now, invite a small shift without forcing anything. Let your teeth part slightly, just enough to create space, nothing forced. And now let your jaw hang just a little and sense your jaw hanging, suspended between gravity below, levity above, supported. And now let your tongue soften, drop away from the roof of your mouth, and sense your tongue resting, wide, easy. And now take another breath in and smell the moment. And as you exhale, sense your jaw releasing even a bit more. And notice what happens in your face, in your cheeks, your eyes, your throat. Notice if that sense of softness begins to spread and travel. Now take a breath in, and as you exhale, imagine any remaining tension is just melting down from your jaw into your neck, into your shoulders, into your chest, your heart and lungs, into your pelvis, down your legs, into your feet, and deep into the earth beneath you. And again, inhale and exhale, releasing even a little bit more. And now, if you feel the desire to gently move your tongue, gently move your jaw, your mouth, go ahead. Might want to open or close or just stay soft. And then find a place of ease. Sense how when your jaw is relaxed, slightly hanging, that it creates space for your whole body, space to breathe, to sense, to feel, to be. Now stay here for one more breath. And as you return and bring your attention back here now, keep a trace of that softness in your jaw, your tongue, your face. Now you can come back anytime to this sensation by merely letting your jaw hang and your tongue relax and your breath be easy. When you're ready, just gently open your eyes and now look around again. Are the colors brighter? Do you have a different relationship to the space that you're nested in? Beautiful. Well, welcome, Aaron. I'm really, really glad that you're here. And I want to start off, first of all, by acknowledging how much I respect the work that you're doing, how you are bridging what I love, modern approaches, that the intelligence of the body and bringing in also some very ancient work as well feels aligned with who I am, with the work that I do. And I think it's going to make for a great conversation. And I also want to honor something personal from your own experience because it's what it inspired me to offer a guided meditation. You've been on a long journey, apparently, with your jaw from surgery in your early 20s to a cascade of effects that followed, impacting TMJ with your teeth, your gums, your breath, your airway. And now you're in the middle of treatment with palate expansion and Invisalign. My husband's going through the Invisalign right now, and I could tell you, it's changed his speech, the tone a little bit. I love bringing our own experience into life and using our healing to enhance how we heal others. So the jaw isn't just a jaw. It's a much bigger part of the system that shapes how we breathe, how we lie, how we feel, how we talk. So this conversation is grounded not only in your history of fantastic wisdom, but your lived experience. That's why I chose to give everybody a little experience of the jaw, because I think many of us hold so much tension in the jaw. And I can't wait for all of this intelligence that's inside you to be shared and heard. So I want to begin with you, and I would love you to start by just telling us your story. What is interesting and meaningful to you that you want to share that brings you here today, who you are, how your work grew?
Certainly have an eclectic background, and I've had the great opportunity to pursue my interests throughout and just keep exploring the things that I'm interested in. And I would say what's been clear to me is we're all working on the same system. There's a human system, and we have all these different traditions of spirituality, of meditation, of medicine, of healing. But at the end of the day, we're all working on the same template, ultimately from different angles and different perspectives. And being able to explore that range is what has kind of navigated my path through life. So, starting with yoga and meditation, Chinese medicine, energetics, and ultimately the way those interferes with what we're feeling and thinking in any given moment, and then how past experiences imprint and shape the way that we show up, often in ways we don't want to, and how do we support ways we do.
Do you have a childhood memory? I have a memory. I'll give an example. When I was 5 and I was going to cross the street, and I turned to my mother and I said, "That lady's going to get hit by a car." And the lady did. And my mother bent down at that moment, took my hands, and looked up to me and said, "Oh, dear, you're Faye. You can see the future." So I was never afraid to receive information. Do you have a story that somehow, when you reflect on, has influenced who you are today and the work that you do?
There was a period of time when I was a junior in high school and I played a lot of sports and I was actually on the basketball team. And instead of doing preseason and kind of as an ambitious young kid, I decided to run cross country so I could get conditioned, but get credit for doing a sport. And before the main meet, we had a meeting, kind of celebration, pasta dinner to prepare. And so there was no particular instance in that moment that I remember. We watched the scene from Star Wars, and it's actually pretty hokey for me at this point. But there was the scene between Yoda and Luke Skywalker, and he's talking where he's moving the rock, and he's essentially talking in this way, saying, there isn't actually a rock there, and you need to account for the space between the rock, and it's the management of the merging of your intention and awareness through that space that allows you to work with this seemingly separate physical object. And something happened to me in that moment that cracked open the sense that perhaps the world isn't the way I think it is. And the kind of more linear ambitions I was pursuing suddenly felt limited and not as deep and real. And that opened up a path that started with martial arts and progressed to where I am today.
I love it. I can see that the path that opened for you is really trusting the unseen, right? What's not there, right? And I love it how it is perfect for what you're doing today through the work, through the telephone. I love also how you
Real
talk
quickly,
about.
that idea of unseen is really important and kind of shaped a lot of it. And sorry to cut you off, Debbie, but
No,
it's
no,
such an
go ahead. Go
important
ahead.
point because it's why I ended up studying Chinese medicine initially. Was I probably would have been a clinical psychologist given my interest, but the exposure that I had had gave this insight that there were all these subtle, invisible dynamics that were underlying the things that I cared most about, the things that we all care most about. What do we want? What are we thinking? How are we emoting? How are we relating with one another? And at this point, I do a tremendous amount of talking. So talking is a big part of it. But I realize there's a technical, mechanical underpinning to that we don't see. And learning and exploring those mechanics that inform our experience, that invisible, unseen mechanics, was a primary driver for me, particularly originally and throughout.
I can't help but return back to what you were talking about, that we are part of this one human system. We have this body template, same but different, right? And yet, from the moment of inception, that unseen that you're talking about, that life force energy that is unique to each one of us, like my thumbprint, begins to form who we are. And I love the mystery of that. Who is that inside? What thoughts are creating that form? What emotions are bringing expression to the form? And what thoughts and emotions are getting in the way of that spirit reaching the full potential that we know this human system of body is given to us through, through its genius. Um, Inner conflict. I mentioned that, we all have it. I feel it throughout the day, all the time. I think just interacting in life, there's gonna be an inner conflict of, "No, I'm not ready to do it. No, I don't wanna do that. Who are you to tell me that I should do that?" Right? An inner conflict of, "Is that my voice or my mother's voice?" Right? Is that a trauma voice or is that a now time voice? So you talk about inner conflict as the root for suffering. Can you help us understand from your perspective what that actually looks like when you are talking and you're looking inside of a person? You're doing it through hearing, I presume.
And so much of what people are coming to me for is often this sense of not actualizing some aspect of themselves in the way that they wish they would and could. And that sense of frustration that I want to, go right, but I feel like I keep going left. And if we step back from that, one of the things that I find really compelling about internal family systems as an approach is that it takes into account the reality that we are in parts, right? The only way we can have an experience where one part of us wants something, but we're unable to achieve it and we're doing something different, once we recognize we're composed of multiple parts, and ultimately that's grounded in our neurology, it's in the different parts of our brains. And we think of our brain as one thing. And that's the challenge. In our normal experience, there are parts of our brain that are there to kind of smooth out and unify our experience. So as we're thinking about ourselves, I'm the person who's thinking and deciding. And if I want to do this, I'm going to do that. And everything feels integrated. But in fact, it's actually a kind of putting together of all of these different parts of our brains that have developed at different parts in different times. And they are often in conflict because they have different functions in our overall structure. And I think part of what's so important in what you were saying, and it goes back to being in utero, what is our brain trying to do? And if we take all of these parts, and it's very complex, we can break it down into two very simple categories. One is something that's authentic. Who are we and what do we want? And another is survival. We're not choosing between these two things. Ideally, they're working in conjunction with one another, but very often they're working in an antagonistic way. And identifying that and breaking that down is what's key.
Beautiful. I love how you're bringing in the anatomy of the brain and the conversations float around that, we have this conscious part. I'm aware of what I'm doing that maybe we use 17%. And then we have this non conscious part, thank you, that's working for us in that survival mode below my awareness, about 83%. And I love the speed when I think about getting information that I can use. That when you look at the brain as you're talking about and processing the bits per second of information that I get consciously is about 2,000 bits per second, but non-conscious mind, 400 billion bits per second. So when you think about that speed and you think about that timing and you're talking about authentic and survival, is it the survival that gets in the way and creates that competition for attention?
Short answer is sometimes. And I think the way you just described this is beautiful. We are living in an anatomy and in a biology that was adapted to an environment hundreds of thousands of years ago that is radically different than the environments we live in today. And the nature of those environments, which is similar to our environment, is overwhelming sensory input. There's far more information at any given moment than our brains and certainly our conscious minds are able to take in and make sense of. And so our brain is organized in a way to filter out from our conscious awareness a ton of stuff and have all sorts of other things being coming in that are relevant, but skirting through things that we're aware of. And our eyes play a really key role in that. And so if we begin to think about it in these terms, that we live in a complex environment and our brain is in this two-way interplay between taking in sensory experience to be able to make sense of it. Ultimately, is there danger here or is there not? And then deeply integrated within our body and all of its systems and our musculature and our digestive system, immune system, endocrine system, through our nervous system to be able to react and respond so much faster than we consciously could. And that understanding that structure and that biology and the interplay between the parts of us, the dominant parts of us that are not within our conscious awareness, either taking in information or how we respond. And that interplay with the parts of us that are conscious and do choose and do have desires. And as you beautifully captured, they're often antagonistic, and I'm sure we will get into how shortly.
Well, having, studied martial arts, like you have, you learn very quickly that your ability to respond and then come back to center is really, really important, as well as the ability to not only be aware of what you see, but what you sense. Because what you sense happens before what you before you can even interpret what you're seeing. Um Do you feel that in today's world, the lack of understanding of our anatomy and our biology, for example, you talked about the eyes, that weakens that potential of that body template that you talked about, and that wouldn't it be great to be teaching these things in school?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that, and especially a big part of how I think is in terms of parts. And that's a very novel idea for people, but it is grounded in our anatomy. And so the more that we can understand the way we perceive the world without instruction and understanding is sometimes out of sync with how we're actually structured. To understand that structure can give a lot of insight to shape and leverage the ways we want to live. So absolutely. And the
Yeah.
eyes are a huge part of that, right? Our eyes, a huge part of our brain is dedicated to the visual cortex. And that is our main interface with the world. And so it's not only how we take in, where you started was beautiful. That first exercise you did is probably the most powerful one we have, which is simply utilizing our eyes. And if our eyes are not working, other senses to orient us in the present moment. And that is the solution at the end of the day. And when we talk about trauma, the essence of trauma is that we have had an experience that was so intense and overwhelming and often outside of our map, right? Our eyes create a map of the world and it's constantly evolving and adapting. Every moment is substantiating, building, adjusting that orientation and map of who we are in the world around us. When we have an experience that doesn't fit into that map, and I want to highlight that point, it's our own map. We're each building our own maps. And when an experience doesn't fit our own map, that's when there's a heightened alert. Something is off. And that experience imprints in a different part of our brain with a different intensity. And the key that happens in that moment, right? If I think about brushing my teeth 3 months ago, which was not a traumatic event with all my jaw
I hope not.
experience, maybe it is. Maybe that's the wrong example here. But I don't, I think about it. I don't remember. There's no emotional charge. There's no memory of other incidents there. I can think about it in a continuous way. What happens with trauma, and we're going to talk about the survival function of that is that the traumatic experience imprints as a packet. The entire experience. What did we perceive? What were we thinking? What are the emotions that were present with us in that moment? And how did we respond within our body and within our action? That gets put together in a packet and stored in the brain. And for us at later dates, when that gets triggered, that's not what we want. We don't want to have a panic attack when we're in line at the bank and somehow we saw something that triggered it. Why is it happening? If we understand the survival nature of it, it makes sense, which is you survive that incident, right? If I'm in a traumatic event, if I survive it, our brains have evolved to understand whatever we did worked. We survived. And so we need to keep that packet at play. And so our eyes and our senses then are constantly looking out subconsciously for similar stimuli that match what was the onset of that experience. And when it encounters that, when it perceives that, doesn't need to be exact, but in a thematic way, it just runs the packet. It runs the packet because it worked before. And that's the way in which that's a totally subconscious process. When I put my hand on the stove, which is not exactly what I'm talking about, but it's a good example. And my hand, if I have to pause and think about, ooh, why is it hot? And how is my hand burning? My hand is burned by then. We need reflexes in emergencies to be able to engage. But very often, because of the outdated biology, we're misperceiving things that are not threatening as threats, and they take us out of the present moment. And that's why orienting through our senses is the solution. Because ultimately, when that packet is running, it's replaying the past. It's replaying the past because it's perceived something that it's connecting to the past. And if we can bring our attention, leveraging our senses into the present moment, that reorients us and turns off that packet most effectively.
That's why I talk about hit the pause button, right? And, the desire to want to, that phrase, be here now, right? To be your authentic self, to not be controlled by the past, right? Use all of those experiences to be the best you, etc. Um, I love the idea that we have outdated information, and that we're not judging it. It's just outdated, just like when I'm gonna get an upgrade on my phone, so that things run more smoothly. So where can we put those packets? Where do we store those packets so that we can stop functioning reactively in survival, and our reactions can become more conscious of who we are in the moment, aware of that, but not constantly looking over our shoulder. Where do we put those packets?
Yeah, and maybe a good way to do this is ground this in example. So I'll give a kind of example of someone who I'm working with. And this is a person who is really struggling to find their truth. This person is a creative. And so the expression of truth through creativity is really important to this person. I'm going to keep everything generic here for identity purposes. And being able to do that has been a struggle for this person. And as we kind of looked towards the past, one of the really important aspects of their experience was growing up in a household where their parents were extremely furious. They would fly off the handle unexpectedly, unpredictably, and intensely. And this person had, several siblings and they lived in a relatively small enclosed space. So it was kind of like living with a tiger, right? You're living with a tiger and you don't know when that tiger is going to eat you or erupt at you in any moment. You can't escape it. And so how do you survive in that moment? And there are a couple things, there are two things that we would all naturally do. One, you always keep your eyes on that tiger. You're never turning your back to it because the moment that tiger, or in this case, the parent, you don't know where they are tracking them in the home, they can blow up and you can be on the receiving end. The other is soothing that tiger, right? In whatever way. We would give it the meat we have. If we can pet it, we would pet it. I don't think anyone's petting a tiger. So this person learned to fawn, learned to soothe, and say whatever to the parents this person needed to in order to calm them down. That was an adaptive strategy. And what now feels frustrating, I can't find or connect to my truth. I'm always placating others. But when we look at it through the lens of that early experience and this understanding of survival, these were adaptive behaviors that worked. By being hyper aware of danger, by kind of reading the room of what people needed and showing up in that way to bring the temperature of her parents down, that protected this person from getting attacked. And that got stored in a certain part of the brain because there was always fear in those instances. So that's the packet, and that's the buildup to your question. Well, what do we do about that packet? And the best thing that we can do is ultimately you can think about it like filing things in a desk. At the end of the day, that packet is stored in the right side of the desk. And when it's stored in the right side of the desk, it's ready to be activated at any moment. You're consciously looking out. So this person is looking out for facial expressions that match what her parents look like, for instance. And that packet is ready to get activated. What you're doing in a kind of appropriate therapeutic context is being able to retrieve and activate it, take it out of long term memory, take it out of the right side of the desk, and put it on the desk in front of you. So you're working on it. But you're now working on it in a controlled, supportive environment. So in the original environment for this person, she was all by herself as a 6-year-old, having to navigate this. Now she's an adult, and people who are working with me or whoever therapist they're working for are now hopefully working with a trusted person. And together we can bring that into working memory and rework the experience in the present moment. And we work it with new ideas, new experiences. You're not alone. You're supported. We tap into your resources that you have now to be able to handle that differently. We go through a series of different experiences, ultimately going back to that moment, but as an adult. And all of these ways recondition that memory so that they begin to feel empowered and safe. And when you do that, automatically, without effort, that memory gets stored in the left side of the desk, a place where it's at ease, a place where it feels like my brushing the teeth 3 months ago. And so the short answer is we we redo that memory, but we revise it based on the current reality and truth, not the outdated, under resourced version of the past.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think that most people can relate in some way to having had a parental experience where one is supposed to be protected and nurtured and cared for, feel safe, feel like they belong, be encouraged, but somehow that doesn't happen. You use the word adaptive and reflexes. Now, my experience from martial arts is I want to train my reflexes so that I'm actually working a little faster than my habitual response might be. But it's more that I have the physical training, like you say, to redo, right? To redo and use my knowledge and skill and training into the present moment to have a better choice, right? A better outcome. Adaptive, when I'm working with people on the dance floor and they begin a movement, my cue will be, what can you adapt, shift, alter so that you feel more flow, right? In the present moment, to soften the eyes on the tiger and to begin to soothe oneself to realize, oh, I do have some control. But one of the other things that I've noticed in working with individuals is there's a third, eyes on the tiger, soothe the tiger, or just leave, where you get a 13-year-old child running away from home or leaving, actually leaving the home. Um, is that more difficult to work with, or is it about the same when it comes to healing?
I would say the conditions, the particular instance, do you save, do you soothe, do you leave? At the end of the day, we have three fundamental options that are wired into our nervous system, right? We fight, we stay, and we engage, right? We flee, we run away, or we play dead, essentially, and shut down. Those are
Yeah.
our only three options of what we can do within our nervous system. Again, this is part of the outdated biology. We have three options in a world in which we have infinite encounters that are socially and emotionally complex. What matters, and the first word you said, and one of the things that I love is finding commonality amongst different traditions, right? Movement, flow, blockage. These are the high level principles that translate through all the different traditions. And there is a natural interplay. And we started by talking about that self and that survival part as antagonistic. They don't need to be. Ideally, they're working in um, conjunction with each other. And that adaptability is grounded in agility, that sense that we're not limited by past holding to be able to be present with what's going on and adapt both subconsciously and in the present moment. Perhaps that's the right definition of health, is the ability to be present with what is, with full taking it in a real way and responding in an appropriate way. What happens through trauma is that that natural flow and movement gets blocked. We had an experience that now conditions our system to respond the same way, and we lose that agility. We lose that flexibility ultimately in our nervous system, in our body, in our interrelationships, and our thoughts and our emotions. So what healing is not so much cultivating movement. And this is where we can kind of take the analogy and saying movement and self are in the same category. That's a natural way to be. We're actually removing the blockage, the lack of flow. And when we do that, movement is restored in a natural way at whatever level we're talking about. And so, is it harder to work with someone who flees? Not necessarily. Sometimes fleeing is the right movement. What's hard for that 13-year-old is a 13-year-old should never have to make that decision on his or her own. And helping that child as an adult recognize now as an adult you have resources inside and your maturity and in the environment you get to choose that you didn't then. That empowerment is the key to the rehabilitation. I have the resources in and out now to choose.
I love that. Giving people the resources, I think that that's what people like you, and I do. Giving people resources to live in their body, to live in relationship with their body, to accompany their body on this experiential journey. Everything is experienced through our body, which is, a physical, mental, emotional, spiritual being, multiple dimensions of voice and experiences. And yet this nervous system that you talk about being activated in a way where we feel that we're being authentic or we're living in survival. Um, I love the concept of being able to take the packet from the right side and then eventually move it into the left. So that we have a resource. We look at everything as a resource. Um, Today, what I feel like is so many people are living on what I call an edge. There's a low level state of survival that's always there that causes the gritting of the teeth or the closing of the hands or that it's always there, and that I feel safe, I belong, I could be myself just isn't there. So there's like a bracing and a restriction to the full potential. Almost like we're preparing for something bad to happen. Um, can is there anything we can do to be aware of what's going on in the world right now, but also, not feel like we're having to constantly protect ourselves?
Three words that come to mind are attention, time, and connection. And these are three areas that are under assault in the modern world. And this entity is a big part of it. And the essence of it is that let's step back for a moment. Balance is the fundamental word of healing, of being able to create balance and sustainability over time. And we can take that in any dimension of ourselves. Let's take it in terms of activity, right? For sustainability, we need to be able to take action to do things, but we need time to recover and recuperate and rest. If we are overactive, this one we're familiar with in modern culture, we burn out. But if we're over restful, we get stagnant. And so it's the interplay between these two, like the yin and yang, which Chinese philosophy beautifully captures, that creates that balance that's sustainable over time. When we think about our attention, it requires engagement, right? If you're not doing anything that engages your curiosity, your creativity, your attention and time, you're going to get stagnant. But the balance point is emptiness. We need that combo of engagement and emptiness over time that creates that balance and sustainability. We've lost that because right now we have something that's always engaging us. You have 1 second, you pick up the phone. You don't even have 1 second, you pick up the phone. And so having our brains and our minds and attention constantly on without having opportunities to turn off for sustained time and to make connection, not just internally with ourselves and the screen, but with others. The sense of eye contact and meaningful connection with others stimulates the ventral vagal part of our brain and turns on our parasympathetic nervous system. So we are in an environment right now that is undermining the very things that allow us to feel oriented, calm, and at ease and present in the world. And that's why I'm going to keep going back. There's so many things we can do, so many techniques, but that basic technique you offered in the beginning, which is look around your environment with intention and awareness. Notice particular sensory things and let your brain and that sensation orient you into this moment. That's the counterbalancing. That's what we need.
You continue to point us in the direction of anatomy and biology. If we can only understand what is available to us to access both our authenticity and to caretake for ourselves, to not just survive, but thrive, to live smart, right? You have a smartphone, we have a smart body too. And how can we live right with that? Whether we're on the mat in martial arts or we're dancing Nia or we're on the telephone with you, seeking to feel better about who we are and reach that magnum opus thing that we know is there that we want to achieve and do it in a way without restriction.
Absolutely. And, body is, I want to comment on it because it's so important and overly simplistic model here, but our minds will get in the way. What are our minds, our
Yeah,
conscious minds meant to do? They are organized around storytelling. That's not a bad thing, right? As I said earlier, we are constantly in a process of building a map of the world. And that map at the end of the day is a story about ourselves and the world and our place in it. And it's something tremendously beautiful about who we are as humans and our creativity and our imagination in our ability to conceive of things that don't actually exist. But the downside, the Achilles heel of that is it's often out of sync with what's really happening. And one of the powers of the body, when we begin to think about brain, mind, body, which of course are all one thing, so it's an artificial breakdown here, the body doesn't lie. It just can't. It only absorbs and responds to reality in a direct way. And that's the power of working with the body. How you're responding in your body is expressing what you're really feeling in a way that our mind will often tell a different story. And the reorientation of that body is the way we rehabilitate. And so much of what we think of as yoga, right? What is yoga? Yoga is exaggerated movement, exaggerated natural movement,
I
right?
love that. That's the first time
It's
I've heard that. That's great.
yeah. Let's think of something like this, right? When we're shocked, right? When something shocking happens, what's our first move, right? A common one is our body does this,
Right,
right? Well, what is that? Why is that a reflex? When we're in shock, our back brain and midbrain gets activated and our ability to be present in a conscious way and our prefrontal cortex shuts down. So we bring some attention back to that place to ground us in what's going on.
right.
And if you just hold your hand here for 5 minutes or a handful of minutes, it begins to soothe and calm our body down. We can do the same thing with breath, right? When we are in a parasympathetic, calm, present state, our breath is naturally slow and deep and even and happening in our lower abdomen. We don't have to try that. We don't intend that. It's what's happening. When we are not in that state and the breath becomes shallow, we can mimic the natural breathing. We can intentionally slow down and deepen that breath, which induces us into a parasympathetic state. We are exaggerating the natural movement. That in an ideal world, we actually want to work at the highest level of at least our biology, and that's in our brain and our midbrain. And if we can learn to work with that in a way that it perceives safety, then we don't need to do these hacks. We just are in that natural embodied breathing state.
We're in that place that, if you study movement, you hear a lot, "Move from center." So, think from center is what we're talking about. And, I love the emphasis, of touch. I talk about this a lot that, our hands are truth tellers. And oftentimes, in my experience in therapy, it was something would come to mind and I would go, "Oh, no, I either didn't wanna look at it, I wasn't ready to look at it," right? And accepting the truth of the body is such an important process of healing without judging the information. Our sweet little body is working and sending us the only thing it can send us, which is truth, right? Truth. Do we want to stay in that relationship? Do we still love that person? Do we want to quit that job? The truth is there, right? We can feel it in our gut, right?
Absolutely. And so much of working with people when we talk about self is how do we use sensation as a compass?
Yeah,
And it's that learning, right? That we live, we been conditioned and educated in an environment that is very heady. And it's not a bad thing, right? Again, this is one of our most valuable assets. But when you are only in thought in an intellectual way, you're out of touch with your sensory body, which is our main navigation system, not just for orienting out there in the world, but who we are and what we want. And part of the work with people is helping them learn to develop that compass. When we feel anxious and stressed, we're going to feel tightness in our chest and in our jaw and in our face and in our throat. When we are connecting to something that feels real and right to us, there's a feeling of release, of lightness, of solidness down in our abdomen. And learning to reconnect to those embodied sensations and learn to leverage them as signals that we want to follow, as our first check, our gut check is imperative. There's no healing without the body for these reasons. And so many people come to me, I and to get very complicated cases at this point, which I appreciate. And the dead end of just sitting and talking, because that's from your head and it's actually addressing the wrong part, right? At the end of the day, what we're working with is in a different part of a non conscious brain and part of your body. So, what you're saying, and if you're only working there, the analogy I live is if there's a flood in the basement, we can talk all day in the penthouse
that's
about it.
great.
But the only thing we can do is get down to the basement and fix that pipe. And that basement is our body. And so all healing, particularly psycho-emotional healing, but all healing requires both a top down, we're thinking, we're understanding, but imperatively a bottom up in our body, in bypassing that thinking of the mind and that storytelling into the truth that the body holds and conveys.
Yeah, I often say, stop for a minute because what you want to listen to is what's behind and underneath. I love the idea of leveraging what our body gives us, the genius, its biology, its anatomy, and the way that we can leverage it, whether it's a nervous system or our jaw, is to really have our own body experience and realize that no parts are separate. And yet, you talked a lot about parts, how helpful it can be to isolate and look at one part to gain understanding and to gain skill because our body holds trauma, it holds history, and you provide a pathway back, as do most healers. Communicating through sensation, that you talk about. Regulation, is such a big word. How do I regulate these um responses with my right, and how do I know that I even have the power to regulate it? What's You talked about breath. Is there anything else that people can do immediately when they capture that moment of freeze grabs them?
And it's a great question. And, we can kind of stack this answer. So, the immediate one is attention, right? Being able to notice. And that is the hardest part. Let's hit pause there, right? Because part of the nature of these packets, of their function, is to say essentially, oh, I sense danger. We're going to get the conscious part of you out of the way that's aware, and we're going to take over and do something that's more reflexive. That's by design. That's not a mistake. So in these very moments that we're most triggered are by design the moments where we are least aware of what's going on. And so our first moment is to try and step back and begin to recognize that pattern. So in live time, as much as is possible, we can see it and hit pause. Hitting pause in the cycle is the most important thing. And then we orient to the moment, right? It's the correction. Danger does happen, and we want to be able to respond to danger. But what we're talking about are the times where we're responding to a non-danger, to a misperceived danger. And what orienting allows us to do is to recognize it's not, in fact, dangerous here, right? A second is breathing. Breathing is just so powerful because it is a both and, right? It is indicative of the state we're in, but it's also a tool we can leverage to induce us into a state. And it's very much embodied, but within our conscious awareness and that an ability to regulate. And that's the power of breath. If I turn to you and say, let's turn off your amygdala, how do you do that? I have no access to that. But I can learn and train to take a slow, deep breath that sends a signal to that amygdala to perceive safety instead of threat. And so learning slow, deep breaths, a very simple practice that's a kind of triage kit for that moment is what's called a physiological sigh. So, you build it by beginning in this deeper belly breath. But what you essentially do is take a full breath in, not overexerting to a natural stopping point. Then you take a sniff and then you exhale. And I like to do that vocalized with an ah. So what that kind of looks like here is ah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love
You do that 2 to 3 times, it radically shifts your state of nervous system.
beautifully. I love the idea if here's your triage, um, attention. Yeah, Aaron's message for all of us. Here's the triage. Attention. Become present. Orient yourself. Where am I? I'm in now time. And then breathing. Inhale, smell the moment. I love the sip or snip, a snip sip. And then an exhale, ah, with the sound. We know that sound is the sound for the heart chakra and it releases the jaw. It's really a good thing. So, Aaron, before we close, I want you to speak a little bit about the fact that healing isn't something we do alone, that we're inherently relational. Can you share why right now for anybody going, gosh, I feel so alone? Connection, whether it's through the phone or through a walk with the trees, that meaningful relationships are such an important part of healing.
As humans, we are a lot of things, but one of those things is a social ape. We are social apes, and that is connected to survival. When our ancestors that were chimpanzees were in the woods, we are not particularly strong. We're not particularly fast. We don't have very sharp teeth. And one baby chimpanzee out in the environment hundreds of thousands of years ago dies. Being alone as a social ape equals death. Survival is being part of the tribe. And that's why so much of our brain developed not so much for the environment, that was part of it, but to be able to read the faces, the minds, and the hearts of other social apes. Because that sense of social connection and integration and being able to be part of that group is how we survive together. And that's baked into our genetics. It's baked into our nervous system. It is baked into healing. As you said, touch. What is the power of touch? That is the power of another in relationship with you that lets us at a physical embodied level know that we're not alone. The very act of all these subconscious processes that we're not aware of, looking into someone else's eyes triggers a whole cascade of neurology that puts us at ease and feeling safe. And that at this point, that used to be natural, right? We lived in tribes and together, and we live at least in modern America, in a very individualistic society, that more and more we're creating separation. And it's a whole nother conversation, the epidemic of loneliness and separation. And it unfortunately now requires being proactive. But to take that action, you have to recognize how essential and imperative it is to be connected with others. It is at the essence of who we are. We're relational beings.
Beautiful. Well, listen, I'm up for a part 2 about loneliness and separation. Absolutely, if you are. I wanna thank you so much. There's so much here for everyone to listen to. Um, the parts of us inside, you might feel it, that you're trying to protect. The body being wise, it's not necessarily there's something to fix, but it's something that we can wake up to, this biology, this anatomy, this genius, this body, this gift that we're given. What I take from this, conversation is so much, but some key words, the importance of paying attention to touch. Where are your hands going, right? Um, that we each have our own map. We're creating our own map. That's a good thing. And yet, we also want to be aware that we have these packets of experiences that can keep us out of being present. But there are lots and lots of things that we can do to be adaptive, to break the reflexes, and remember the triage, right? Attention, orient, and breath. Allow yourself, the one inside your body, to observe through sensation, tension, conflict, holding, and touch and breathe. And just say to yourself, soothe, self soothe. Say, it's okay. I'm here now. And maybe it would be important for you to reach out and not go this alone, but to work with someone like Aaron or another professional to help you get unstuck. Listening to our body, listening to our breath, listening to the places like our jaw where we hold, we protect, it's all information for you from your body. It's personal for you, it's wisdom. Inside listening to sensation, there's so much information. There's intelligence. And there's a pathway back to healing and feeling better and feeling whole and balancing that authentic part of you with the survival protective. For everybody's listening, take a moment right now and just check in with your body. Yeah, attention. Just pause, orient yourself, look around again, and then breathe. Soften your jaw, let your tongue rest. And remember, you can always do something to feel better. You're not alone. You can learn more about Aaron by going to Aaron, that's Aaron at AARONTEICH.com, Aaron Teich. And I personally invite you to enjoy 2 weeks free of movement on Nia on Demand, opportunity to experience the movement artistry of Nia based on an act of love, of listening, respect, and devotion to your body and life. Find out also more about Nia on nianow.com, social media, Nia Technique. I want to thank you so much for listening. Remember that this is our time right now to get in and to listen. I'm Debbie Rosas, and I'll see you next time.